of, and their expression is photography of some sort. And the dynamic of what happens in that. But that somehow the one who's engaged in the exploration that the camera sort of allows you into. It allows you into a world that seems to be standing still while the rest of it is moving past you. So somehow you're seeing time shifted. And while you're seeing it, somehow it's natural to you that your body is also seeing it through the lens. So the premise is that you're seeing something that's not seen literally in the literal world because it's going on too fast, it's busy doing its thing, where somehow they're looking into the thing, they're looking into the natural, sees dimensions hidden in it, that become then your expression. So let's say somehow you have a creative, somehow that you have a creative lens in relationship to an organized world. And we'll say you're writing about it, or you're somehow you have a relationship to the organized world, but you're not literally in it, you're in it, but not of it. So being in it, but not of it, it gives you a perspective on something that's happening where you understand the literal world is determining that this is the way you have to live in order to survive, and this and that, that is the norm in that. And that this other one is not so logically oriented that way, but it's coming from a different perspective. So let's say I'm a student of music, or I'm a student, and so then I start devoting myself to exploring the nature of the music, where what it is, what is its absence, its presence. It takes me into so many journeys, and I'll stumble upon philosophers or theorists, even physicists, who are describing basic things from another perspective, and somehow it enlightens me a bit. And as you walk past each church in a rainstorm, you see each theological framework that they have, some contradicting the others, some embracing the others. You see a common thread running through it, but then you also see that anytime something came to power, it exercised that power. And so then whatever the organized religion was, those were the true believers. Generally, the rest didn't exist in some way. So then you see through time and space the whole organizing principle, while in fact flux is happening. The attempt to organize on flux, the attempt to literalize on flux, meant that you then created something called history. That I am not just having this life, and we are not just sharing this life, but we are part of a historical construct that is taking place. That is very much like a belief system, or most of the religious belief systems, that somehow you're working your way towards God or towards heaven or towards, and basically you're working your way towards a home of your own. And so it seems to have the same progressive sense of what life should be. But generally, if in fact you are involved somehow in reflective sense, then it's kind of more art is how life should be. That somehow what you are, that there's a perspective in you that takes up what you're doing. From that perspective, you've had an experience of some kind of creative freedom and you re-enter the story, but you bring that element to the story now with you. And then in that, you then stumble upon characters throughout history that resembled that sort of breakthrough in thought and structure, who saw a larger picture. So it's like someone waving as you're driving past or walking past. And you see that you're in it, but you're not of it. There are suggestions of who am I? What is this life? Where are we? At the same time, one is living a life. But at the same time, as we try to look back on it 3 years, we don't see it 3 years. we see a mush of time and space, and somehow, but it wasn't so existing literally like that. It was more a mishmash of time and space. And then when I get that exam yesterday, and they're going in with the camera again, finally in there, and I'm navigating to see. So this is I want to kind of balance my own sense of what's happening with that picture of what's happening. And in order to get that picture, this time I had to go through, again, antibiotics. But at the same time, it gave me the picture. I got to have the camera go through my body like that and see what was happening. There was a little pimple over there on one little, just like it would be on your nose or on your, there was a little pimple on the thing or something like that. But it seemed pretty interesting, like to go through your own body like that and to go through little holes and in the openings.
You get to watch it. You get to watch it.
Yeah, as we're talking, he's talking about Hawaii and the nice trip that he had to Hawaii, and I'm kidding around with him. I'm getting to see, I had to go through this. It's almost as if we were going through a ceremony, even though it's a medical thing. Because then this large woman came out with tattoos, and we were goofing and kidding, but she's the one who puts the thing inside of you. But we were kidding around, and I said, "Is he back from Hawaii?" He says, "He's all tan and everything. He's back in Hawaii. He's talking about you." And so we were kidding around like that. So we created an atmosphere like that. But then you get to see, well, it was kind of spiritual, inside of your body, not as your body, but you don't even know about it in some way, but it's as much you as you are, in some way. So in the exploration of it, then the thing that we kid around with Jai and Urja is that's by a year, because then he says, okay, it seems like you're okay for another year before there's another examination like that. So I haven't gone to any other doctors in years. Just this one guy who doesn't do more than just that one thing. And what it is what we had a friend Marty may have, where it was cancer before it got to stage 3. It was always interrupted. And then I had taken something that was actually reduced TB, tuberculosis 18 years ago or something. I tried this experiment. And for 6 weeks you had to take it. But it, somehow it awakened the immune system. There's certain parts, certain organs that it can be cancer very badly before you even get any symptoms. So then you kind of visit the world of dying, and but then you also visit the world where people dying to live will fight to live at this money, and you enter into scams and stories and so. But at the same time, we're just doing our own thing, juices and stuff like that. And the notice that I got was that there's a year still okay. Unless something else happens, you fall down and hit your head. Segway is working so hard out there, laying down. He's made a whole trail, and he's laying down stone. Wow. He's laying down stone everywhere. He's transformed the place out there.
Wow, nice.
And then he and his girlfriend Jen then also worked all day yesterday, and they're transforming the place out there. But he's huffing and puffing. But he seems really, you can't stop him now. He's just caring for everything.
Oh.
Okay, shall we have an exploration of, well, let's say one's own daily process. And as we were just discussing, I think for all of us, this similar experience of this 3 years has not been a literal 3 years in the same way. And that time has many factors in it, but it has been, holy shit, that this 3 years has passed. And I remember 3 years ago, we were saying, remember the questions you had 3 years ago? God. should I do this? I wonder I should be doing that. No, and
I never questioned it, Danny.
no, not question it. I thought at one point, like some of us will be in the journey, in the sadhana, where the literal events kind of capture you in aloneness. Do you know what I'm saying? There is an aloneness factor that comes at times with a creative life. And that somehow you're not moving in the same frequency of survival or continuity, but that somehow you're related to feelings being the basis of the intimacy, not.
Oh, that, yeah.
No, so I'm saying, but what I'm saying is we're shedding a light on a process that a person is going through while they're living their everyday.
Mm-hmm.
This process is going on, and it's not so much me wants love or me, this damn thing in me.
It's so true. That is so true.
So then I say,
what is that thing?
So then it takes my head like this and says, okay, you want to be in love then? You want going like that. And I say, no, let me just watch Netflix. And they say, no, Danny, don't you? Okay. So then who is this? What is this?
Good. Thank you for asking that question.
Because then you understand when that question comes to you, just by sitting there, it may come to you. Then it also has an effect in relationship. And so that's been your study to some extent, to see you have had some aspect of the study of the energies of something and how it coexists in many ways, where even thought and the physical body are interactive in a way, and that you can, but that somehow you must be in a state yourself to unlock or see and be with these elements, because they're not literally the same kind of way of thinking where you own it or you sell it or anything like that. It's more like a being with. So some of the expressions of an energy or a feeling is more of a being with something. And then you, in some sense, you become aware of a parallel energy that is the basis of most relationship and most structures or whatever, but yet no matter how much they try to study it literally or capture it or whatever, it's elusive. And that somehow it requires your journey to be with it. And when it requires your journey, you see that your life is somehow devoted to that. So I would say, holy shit, then, because that's contradictory to the literal idea of capitalism and earning and literal and building, and where in fact the question then that comes to the person is the depth of their living now, and that their future is coming out of the depth of their living. It's not that they're avoiding this or their experience is waiting. Human experience is waiting.
You know, I was just reading this Yogananda quote, and it was something about marriage, or, and until you only want God, basically, you have to keep being reborn. And what does that mean? I mean, what does that mean?
You know what that means, Spiro? A Yogananda theory of rebirth?
Which is what?
Can't you only want God and want a relationship?
The one thing about these guys for the last 20,000 years or so to present day is they've been talking a lot of shit, like they know what they're talking about. And yet there has been no historical sense that anyone ever knew what the hell they were talking about. So somehow the universe, the whole life itself eludes any capture. And I said, because what then happens is that they literalize their exploration.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a know-it-all kind of exploration. If you do this, this will happen. But again, organize it in the same way with a motive, that somehow happiness will be there if you walk the step and you do the thing. And happiness is a feature that also seems to be for sale very much in the society. You'll be happy if you wear this or you do this or that approach or you think this. So there's a kind of literal happiness when it would seem to me that the happiness of an actor, the happiness of a creative being would to live the whole life, the experience, to be with, the energy. So at the same time, there have been organized, the goodness of the organized behavior over a few thousand years is you see it also entered into the social construct where then Christian ideals become also the way of the government, you know, and so that becomes the only way or whatever. The way of the government is the literalness, but you see the way of the government has a future, and the way of then the church has not a nowness but a future. And the future, if you work hard and you live this way or that way, it will be towards that. So somehow, when there are moments where it's not so much around organized behavior, but there is an intuition.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow the organized behavior brings you to a moment where it fails. And that's historically in many biblical dissertations, you'll see the failure that the person then had, the believer with God. Why was it such tragedy, such a thing happened? And a kind of struggle, deep energy, conflict with the contradictory sense of trying to literally have God's energy into paying your rent and working out your life and so on like that. And can you? But that was the premise. But then you also may make a discovery that the literalness of God, owned by a church or a belief or structure, denies the humanness of the experience, the shared experience in some way. And so I feel then you then find an intuitive way to be related to the mystery.
I like that.
Hmm?
I like that.
An intuitive way, we have intuition being very dumb thought of and logical thought. But when you look deeply at what is called intuition, you see it was very essential to creative in math and physics and so many approaches to life. And even in the interpreters of the biblical experience, what was really going on here or whatever, they had to somehow live the life in order to have intuitive elements coming out of them. So there's always been a interaction with a mystery throughout time. And there has always been an attempt to literalize that interaction with the mystery, but the mystery doesn't seem to act in the same way as a possessive or literalization. It invites you outside of yourself, not so much that it joins you in the story. But so I think that as you become aware of the energy, relationship to an energy, it's a not possessive, it's a corresponding experience that's happening that one really realizes in time when they look back at life. They see these other elements that were there. So then taking a trip inside one's body, going up and in and out and around and seeing where you are and measuring where you are, because you still feel like you inside whatever form you're in. You know, so here's you're an 82-year-old body, holy shit. But I said, but I'm still experiencing it just as if I'm just in the body, visiting the story and living the story. We'll see where it takes us. We have another year. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
How are you feeling about it? Can one actually experience this without it being voodoo? You could even see voodoo in it, but we don't have to study voodoo. We could see religion. We see the religion in it, but we understand that somehow having a feeling allows you an access to a feeling. And in the exploration with that feeling, we're kind of seeing parallel situations, not only our life as a possessive, but the life that was lived also, that would be seen by an observer, that would be seen by the energy, but only we would find out about in later times. And in finding out about it, the discovery of it frees you from the literalness of it, and you saw that it was a creative life. But to live it, it was a literal life. But when you look back at it, no way that your life was a literal life. It was very weird. Very weird scene. You came at it. You could not have invented that.
No.
You understand? And they say, "What do you do now? What's the name of the philosophy that you have?" I say. So let's say I discovered that I lived this creative life. I didn't know I was living it while I was living it. I thought I really had to struggle with the rent. I had to fight with this. And now I was realizing that it was just a rehearsal. I had to have certain experiences.
Oh, I like that.
I had
Rehearse.
to have an experience of falling in love. I had to have an experience of being scared. I had to have an experience of happiness because I was fulfilled. I had to have an experience of having that destroyed. Boy, you were so insistent on having the experience. No one could talk you out of it. You were determined to have this Urja experience. What do you think? How was it? You still
I mean,
into it or with buying time now?
buying time.
You like that trip we just took, Spiro? We just took a trip through living and dying and what the hell's going on and who am I? And 60,000 years of what? What does God want? Who am I in relationship to this energy? You okay, Urja?
Yes, Danny. Thank you.
So it freed the story to some degree, the examination, because then we saw that. But then again, the irony is then talking to someone who's having that removed, and and so I see the procedures that they went through. And so it's almost as if and talking to them so intimately about what they were going through, I may have caught what they had. I've been finding that out a little bit, that sometimes in comforting someone, I end up with the same kind of condition they have in some weird way. But I kind of have their experience. I mean, what does it? How does it feel? In other words, while you're burning inside you, and you're having a conversation, you're having a normal conversation, or you're going about your business or your job or whatever. So then you see this, in fact, is the dialogue that is happening in most people. It doesn't have to be physical hurt or illness. It can be what's happening at home, or this is happening in your life or whatever. While at the same time you have a normal job or a normal life. The normalcy becomes this juggling act. And so then you see that there's inherent, any person has so many dimensions going on in their head at one time. The rent money, what to do tomorrow, what we'll do, okay, what to wear today. Okay. All of these things are brilliant. But once perceived, and they're no longer part of in other words, now you have a time where you don't have to do anything. You can figure out what you like to put on, go out, figure out who you. So you see, then it's almost completely a creative act for you to go downstairs, to do a job, to give some readings, then to.
Garden.
And I say, from this you earn a living. Okay, and you say, pretty civilized living. You couldn't have figured.
Yes. Very.
You couldn't have invented something.
No.
Okay. And you're into it. So we have a year then more, and we'll see how it looks next year. Urja, by the way, is 1 month older than I am. So
Wow.
Do
so we're kind of we're seeing
that's
if kind of we'll call it spiritual. Shall we call it spiritual or creative time or literal time? There's a point where they're not contradictory. Hmm? Because then you also see your experience in literal time where people are struggling or whatever. You see the struggle that's going on. There is an inherent struggle
Yes.
that even from the perspective, the struggle doesn't exist. It's a human element. Once you enter into the story, there's literalness of who is who and what is what. And but you also see that somehow most of us have had relationships or friendships that navigate through different stories. I just remembered a song there. There was a girl in Spanish Harlem. Remember that song?
Yes.
Yeah. So he was a kid living on the other part of town. It was like Bronx Story, that movie. But and that there was a girl living in Spanish Harlem that he was in love with, but they weren't supposed to mess with that kind of Spanish people or something like that. Okay. So a dumb thing is that. Can that be as dumb as that, where somehow a look transcends time and space and situations? But that look was supposed to not happen religiously or structurally. That's the wrong person to have that look with or whatever. But let's say people fell in love by accident, situation, circumstance, where they had a common path shared together. Or there was, in time, you look back at it and you say, well, what brought this together and how did this happen? And it all looked like accident and situation. You saw the creative elements of it. But in retrospect, because the doer was not in the story. And so you see how many people you were in that story, how many roles you assumed and what structure you played. And a thread ran through the story. And as the story in each, as it shifts or circumstance happened or whatever, you see that the relationship to the continuum shifts. In retrospect, you see it. You see an incident may have not caused it, but an incident revealed a shift in the feelings between the people. For one to visit that space somehow has to come from no history or whatever. In other words, you see the mystery of your own life. And you see then in that mystery, you see the perspective in that mystery, you see a kind of holiness that runs through it that doesn't have to be contrived by anything. But then you understand that ritual was not in the church and all this were not really rituals. They were experiences that people shared, coming from a common feeling. So then you start to see the beginnings of the experience was more an immersive element that people shared deeply. And their sense of life then manifests. Once it becomes literally around survival, then the survival starts to squash all the other elements of life and making only survival the necessary ingredient. At that time, one's perspective, I would feel that one goes underground with their feelings because the status quo denies reflection as part of its life. So then we share a common element where reflection about the normalcy gives us some sense of different dimensions of what's happening, coexisting. Not so much the doer, but as a matter of fact, the more surrender of the doer as being the center of the story. You see, it starts then to, when you see it not from survival element as pressure, but then when you see the survival sense enters into the story, you see how it dominates in the world of business, in the world of structure, in the world, it tends to own it or run it. But as it before it's literal, you see it's a creative act. And so I feel when we know that we have another year to play with, it's more creative Never, because dying and living is not such a threat or whatever. It's more a kind of negotiation that you're having.
Yeah.
But that's how it appears. Then I feel that now we're also experiencing some folks that we're meeting who are where in fact the dying and living proposition is literalized, because there is in fact dying and living happening with the juggling act and treatments of cancer and stuff like that.
Yes.
But at the same time, we're having conversations as we've always had. Is this not the amazing thing that you can have tubes coming out of your nose and head and everything like that, and you're still talking about? We went out and got some peaches this morning. The first, we bought a dozen peaches that came in this morning from Colorado. So I said, I
Okay.
mean, with all the world going up in the air and flowing over, you still bought a dozen peaches this morning. So we're acting as if it's our normal.
Mm.
Everyone here seems to be having their normal. Is anyone else on, Kai? Or
Yes. Let me see. So far, who has said hi is Jimmy and Blue in Light.
okay, so shall we hit the gong for a moment?
Danny,
Yeah.
I just want to say I have to go soon because I'm going to the dentist, so I will just disappear.
Okay, that's
When I
fine.
have, okay.
I was scheduled to go to the eye doctor today, but then we put it aside because it would have been in an hour also. So
Yeah,
okay,
yes,
so we'll see you soon then.
yes, but I still have a 10 minutes.
Okay. Is anything coming up that you wanted to explore? What's happening?
It's just sometimes there is no word. Like I lay down on a bench by the creek in open sky and seeing all these incredible clouds on a blue sky, and I felt like I was back as a kid. It was like almost there was no separation between the wow, and the cotton weed floating around, and the swallow taking those cotton thing because it's good
Oh,
for the
really?
nest. There you go. I saw one was just right in front of my nose.
So how, that's really interesting. It's somehow at this time you can be interested in things that you just took for
Yes,
granted.
yes.
Even sitting outside there, I was looking at the birds were deciding what to do, you know, and because Mary has this water fountains out for them or little, you know, and so then I'm looking at small little things, what new growth came, and then so it was very interesting to see the things that you normally see, then you're seeing, you know, and holy
And
shit.
it's the same delight as a kid has.
Well, that's what I'm saying about this this camera going inside your body in that
Yeah.
way while you're watching it, and he's talking about Hawaii and surfing or whatever. But you're going around to see what looks like uh, that's been all your life. You
Yeah.
each time you meet is from that way. It's a different you, but then you also see the coexisting. That you see how many lives are being lived while you're living. And you then kind of have a feeling, just for the whole interactive sense, you're somehow aware and not fear or whatever, but there's then becomes a cooperative and eating and this and that without figuring it out so much. Meaning that somehow your life itself is becoming a creative act where the time factor is not so literal. It's somehow you understand that there's a dialogue going on with the mystery. And somehow you've created an atmosphere for yourself where you can accidentally meet this, or this can happen, or that can happen, but there's a friendly environment.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow you've created a friendly environment that is allowing people to be somewhat free in their situation and kind of looking out for each other so that there is some dignity in the life. But not only the medical dignity that they're talking about, but somehow a space where anything can happen, the time to play with and this and that, where you see some grace has entered into the story literally, and it's allowed you to not only come to psychological terms, but to kind of come to loving terms. The trap is psychological terms, but you see again, if someone passes away, you see loving terms. The only thing is loving terms have to be
Danny, you're frozen.
Is that just Danny? Sometimes I don't know if it's my computer.
I think
Yeah,
it's-
yeah,
I
me
think
too.
it's funny. I bet you their internet cut out.
Oh,
Well, I'm going to go, and you can tell Danny when he comes back. And thank you.
enjoy the dentist. I have to go to the dentist in a couple weeks too.
And yesterday I was there for an hour and a half, but today,
Oh, you're getting procedures done.
yes. Okay, well, thank you, Guy. Thank you,
Love you,
Derek.
Ursha.
Have a
Yeah, I lost you there.
Oh, Danny's back.
Yeah,
Ursha had to go.
she has to go. Good, just in time.
Yeah.
So now, Derek, you were saying that concurrently, as you explore this, you then have run into philosophers through time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what do you run through? Person was then trying to, so many of them were trying to study their religion for for a corresponding philosophy.
Yeah. It seems like Heidegger and Buber both kind of maybe dabbled in the Eastern religions, maybe like Buddhism, or just you hear that it's informing that, and it's like they're bouncing it off their predisposition towards their own raised religion.
Okay, so but there's a corresponding difference between a person who's trying to live and adopts the code of behavior of living, but a person who's actually touched deeply, but wants to explore this life and what is this thing and what is death and life. And so they're also intrigued with that. And they then, once they start to have certain desires that way, someone close to them dying, or they explore whatever scholastically, where they want to see a bit deeper element. So then we'll say most educations will give you a deeper element of how things work or whatever, where you can then assume a role. But for some, the education was more a study of what happened. They're still studying what happened with Jesus. What happened in that room? What did they say? What did Paul say afterwards?
Mhm.
How didn't the true believers didn't have any conflict with the difference in the religions? They saw it was coming from the same feeling. They weren't caught up in the story. They were the same folks who did this. So let's say for 1,000 years they're studying this. What happened? And for 2,000 years they're studying the other premise of how does it then play into the world. And then there were some forms of the religion that isolated themselves from the world, that they felt that the world was a sinful place because they didn't believe in the religion their way. And so no matter what they did out in the world, they rejected and they kept their story on. And that's actually what's happening out there now with the recurrence, I think, with the evangelistic Christians joining the evangelistic Jews in Jerusalem, with Trump buying Jerusalem for them and making the main place there in Israel. So it's all the main thing but it looks like literalness, but what you see is that still we're in it, but we're not of it. And then you also saw, as they literalized the life and as they literalized the religion, they took away some of the magical aspects of it, which were experiential. And I feel that those who had experiences of it then also were able to, it was not contradictory, the science of it, when you had the experience of it. You saw different views of it, just as if there were people on the rooftop looking down, seeing the situation, people on the street seeing the situation. They saw a similar circumstance, but from a different perspective. But perspectives didn't own the story. They just gave you dimensions of a happening. What you did find out, that it wasn't, the history was not literal. The history has been more of a mystery. The question first asked from the beginning, who am I? What am I? Where am I? What is, okay. And that question comes to someone when they are in fact have experienced something where the interruption of the regular life is there, and there's a soul searching that happens, which is the very thing that is avoided, is the very thing that the person is exploring. And has, because you start to depart from the literal world to some degree to explore this, the first elements may be reactive, but as you, reactive because you see you are exploring a kind of world that was unknown to you, that your own life had a spiritual dimension happening in it, but that you perceive it somehow when you lose it, or that somehow in retrospect you experience the loss of something, and you saw that the loss of the experience was built into the experience. It wasn't an accident. You found the deepest way, the deepest hurt available to you to locate something in you that changes the structure a little bit of who you think you are and what you think you do. You meet an energy at times in what looks like loss. But you see, it is not, it is loss only on the literal world. It is not loss in the journey that you've taken up in your life. So loss is an experience that's an essential ingredient in seeing something. Where it is not my loss or its loss, that loss wasn't, you see the flow of life and you see the inherent, a parallel life being lived while you live the literal one. And you saw in the first moment, everything that happened in time was there in the first moment. And creatively it happens, it unfolded in time. But you also see what it took to continue. While it was in flux all along, you see what it took to continue the continuity form or whatever. It was always a creative act. And when the creative dimension shifted to whatever focuses the literalness of it, then the creative link starts to fall and then it becomes literalized from my experience. When it becomes literalized, then the relationship becomes you did this and you did that and you understand the kind of where things that may have been graceful then become literalized in the circumstance. And you see the difference somehow entwined. You see the entwinedness. It almost has something breaking up and continuing and fluxing at the same time, is almost resembling living and dying simultaneously. And you start to see elements of that running through form, running through all aspects of life, where there is a coming and going simultaneously with the everyday. What do you say, Spiro? We were talking about, was it Heidegger?
Yeah. Well, about being and
No,
nothing in the
let's say these, all of these that you'll read there, and then there's structure with politics and humanism and the whole idea of Marx being completely against the capitalism, that capitalism represented evil. Once you land in the ground, they can see why. And they say because it has motive. Okay. So you see the arguments that prevail. Is it real? Is it not real? What's the interpretation of biblical scripture? Is it really on literal church time, or is it flux that they're talking about?
Can
Is
we
it
dream of anything outside of it?
yes? So that's the premise of the social fabric. It resembled in the Christian ideal of a future and a heaven and a reward and a this and that, and then you also entered into a system that resembled that with reward and working hard and being true to something in a literal element of it. And you see immediately where you're going to screw up because it represents kind of Chinese way of thinking too much in some sense of somehow organized behavior, but they're talking about behavior, not perception in some way. Meaning what? That somehow the friendships that took up and connected weren't as organized. They organized themselves once they had the feeling. So let's say one meets the parallel life. Like, hey, and you see that it exists on you see the creative dimension of what's been going about that you took for granted as normal. What do you say, Spiro? Oh, you have a picture of Spiro. That was I was talking to a picture of Spiro. Boy, oh boy. Okay. Okay, now we'll talk a bit looser then.
It's confusing the world.
Do we get a glimpse at moments where you see parallel lives being lived simultaneously?
I think so. There's definitely that
Sort
part.
of access to these lives are not possessive, but they come from a different play. So usually accident or stumbling upon them or discovery is the medium, not so much because it has to be that way, but because it's not, those elements are not organized so much by motive.
Right. But I just forget it immediately. Like I just, there's the aha, there's yeah, and then there's the mundane and the everyday just grabs you back, grabs me back.
So the mundane also becomes part of that when you lose it in some way. And you have a retrospective in relationship to it. You see that somehow not seeing it is an important element of carrying on.
That
It's not a
makes sense. I
flaw.
dream of a way that the literal is just an expression
So let's
of
say
the
you're dreaming
evocative.
now. While you're awake, you're dreaming, and you're here, and you see parallel situations flowing through you. No, you can
Check.
close
Got
your
it.
eyes or not, but you see parallel situations, and so they sometimes literalize as motives when there's something similar in the neighborhood or something. Okay. But you also see a process happening. And you then see into yourself continuity and creativity, and the creativity having no structure at all. That is not structural bound. It's kind of experiential. So you see that you're setting up an experience for yourself where you've normalized your life. And so some critical mass is kind of revealing that it was kind of the very, you've been a good-hearted schmuck as a philosophy.
The
What do you think,
performance.
Kai? You can look
What?
at, you can see that his philosophy is no matter what he's talking and this and that, if a friend calls him up and he's in trouble and he okay. So you see he's a good-hearted schmuck, probably very
Yeah.
much like Jesus. Probably
It
Jesus.
seems to me that he is living the creative life through the literal. I mean, it
So
doesn't.
then we meet a Jesus thing, and we don't. It's not schmuck like fool or stupid. It's schmuck because it has a kind of inherent innocence to it that no matter what it's saying, it will be touched by something, and it will share itself. And that is the advice that they tell you not to do, that you should save and do and fight for, basically. But that you have a shared life or that an experience takes place. So you see that somehow one has been attempting to have a framework for what they've been about. And it is the journey. Whatever variation of the journey you stumbled into or found out about or whatever, you start to see that it was talking about life as a somehow unfolding process, not as a literal one, but that it was a journey. And that when you then had relationships, it was kind of a journey in togetherness. And that when the feeling was there was something holy in it that gave it somehow a dimension. If somehow the feeling would shift, and this is premised in many ancient texts that the feeling will shift. And when the feeling shifts, they say that it goes from love to hate in different forms. And they say, well, why is hate? Because one is captured in the love framework when the love is missing. So there is a kind of challenge that happens when one is entrapped in a framework where the essence is missing in the literal story, because it was love that opened up, a feeling of love that opened up a doorway in the first place. So there's descriptions of when the feeling leaves. It's not actually leaving in this or that. It's more like seasons or something like that. When it leaves, an effect that takes place as it runs through the literal story. So then you kind of see the energy coming and going. It is not so much related to the ego survival or the sense of survival, literally. You discover that the love experience is not built and captured around the sense of survival and the literalization. It is a creative act from the get-go. And that the negative and positive aspects are both creative dimensions of it. Where if there's genuine feeling in its loss, it sends you to a place that is more on the other side of dying, or where the literalization of life shifts. So I feel that the love feeling, the loss, the circumstances, not only the literal relationship of it, but where there was a genuine feeling shared. I think the genuine feeling then opens up dimensions of people that were kind of hidden without that feeling, because it is a genuineness to it. One then has a journey. And the journey is a navigation around that. And the thing that can open up a doorway can close doorways, that you understand that you're relating to energies. And it doesn't have a literalization of a scholastic sense of possession. It does have a scholastic sense of failure. But it's not failure in the old terms of scholastic. It is failure as a necessary experience, because you bring a certain naive to it. So somehow in the creative aspect, motive is dealt with. That motive only has the capacity to literalize and reinvent itself. But that to visit a creative dimension, the motive doesn't own the story. It's an exploration. So in retrospect, you can see that many of the relationships from the get-go, they say, oh, this experience is waiting for you, of course. And it had to be thorough, and it had to send you to a place over nothing. It had to be over nothing. One is experiencing the life. And when one is experiencing a life that is not that organized, you see that there is a range of experience in living a life, a creative life. If there's a hey baby that invites, and there's, of course, a dimension just waiting there, whatever, to share. That shared life has in retrospect, once it's lost or found or shifted, you see what it was. And it was normal. And so somehow we can live a life where it's normal to have friendship, it's normal to be in love, and then you see the hurt of that, and you see the whole creative life alongside the everyday life. And what looks like the everyday you see is remarkably creative in its own way, in its normalcy. And it's as creative as Segway putting a footpath out there in the back with redstone. Okay. Would have been a holy shit for us a year ago that he worked so hard and put it in there and he threw himself into it like that. Hmm? So I think we are in a holy shit period individually, and I think a collective seems to be happening for life. Hmm? I don't even know if life is limited to human, not human, or whatever. There seems to be an experience waiting in each form. Hmm? But it does seem at one point that the lives intersect again and then take shape and form again. So I'm kind of very much reflective of almost everything that's happening. Is also reflective of even any film I'll see or something I'll hear or interaction or my own dream process or seems to have that space as being very much a part of even the literalness of the doctor and the examination and what's really going on. But it's an examination of inside of you that is rare to see, and you see the life and you also see the experience, not only from how it looked outwardly, but you see how it was internally, how your body experienced what was happening. I see. So in that, increasingly, life is coming more from the perspective of more of a mystery that literalizes, but that we are surrounded by what looks like normal, but is a remarkably creative act to me at the same time that's happening. And I think that Mary is going to have a grand opening on Friday, is it? Spiro?
Yeah, she's hesitant to name it anything grand. And but it is a sweet gathering. And I'm excited about it. I'm gonna make tea.
Uh, well, to folks who don't know, Mary has had a separate expression called Minetta, named after the street that we lived on in New York there, and where she hand makes things, and I think now her sister is hand making things, and Seth, my son, who also makes his own things there, and then Spiro lately has been teaching yoga class from there, and it's in flux. The place itself is up in the air. So I guess there's some sort of opening coming Friday, but still keeping it quiet and discreet between friends coming and dropping by. So we'll see how that goes. Is everyone else okay? Eric, you're okay? To explore that further, if you'd like, well, I was just reading a little bit more of Buber and their attempt to I and thou and that sort of thing, because it's happening in the everyday, though. I think the spiritual exploration and the everyday exploration are kind of simultaneously happening. And for most of us, I think that even everyday events will kind of reveal that. And especially in walking, how beautiful how it looks out there, even the plants out there growing and this and that. And so it has been pretty strangely beautiful. Is that okay, Kai? We'll maybe see you Sunday.
Yes.
Okay, really
Beautiful.
nice to see you.
You too,
Take
David.
care then, Derek. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Okay. Thanks, Danny.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you
Namaste.
guys.
See you in a minute or 2 or 10.
What?
He said, see you in a minute or two, since he's sitting across the room there.
Oh.
Thank you, Kai.